Hey everybody, it's Brett and welcome back to a bonus summer episode of Behind the Stack. I hope you're all having a good summer, where today I am sitting down with author Joe Pan for his debut novel, Florida Palm. A little bit about Joe. Joe is the author of 5 poetry books and founder of Brooklyn Arts Press, one of the smallest independent houses ever honored with the National Book Award in Poetry, and publisher of Augury Books, honored with the Lambda Literary Award in lesbian poetry. His writing has appeared in the Boston Review, Hyperallergic, the New York Times, and Poets and Writers, and he's been profiled by Publishers Weekly, The Rumpus, and the Wall Street Journal. He grew up along the Space Coast of Florida and now lives in Los Angeles. With his wife, he co-founded BA, an activist group that serves unhoused populations with sleeping bags and goods. Florida Palms is his debut novel. So please enjoy this episode of Behind the Stack. I'm really thrilled to have Joe Pan here today with his debut book, Florida Palms, it's just fantastic. It is very much how it's been pitched, which is The Outsiders meets Sons of Anarchy. I mean, I couldn't have. It's so perfectly pitched. But so welcome. I'm so thrilled you're here.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm excited to speak with you and talk about the book and all kinds of stuff. Let's get into it.
So usually I launch in and I love to ask writers a lot of their background, and I do want to get into that with you.
Absolutely.
But I feel like so much of your personal background is kind of tethered to almost situations or things within the book. So I'd rather have you start with giving an elevator pitch of the book, and then we'll get all into it.
Okay. Well, the elevator pitch is basically Florida Bombs is about a group of young men who are fresh out of high school that get dragged into a drug running operation. You know, one of their parents is this kind of burly old biker who did time in San Quentin, who is down on his luck and is trying to find a way to make money. And this is the height of the Great Recession, 2009, Florida. So there's for sale signs everywhere. People aren't doing so well. And this person from the past that the father had done business with comes back into the equation. And these kids are brought in to run a new type of drug called Shank up and down I-95. And it's about their choices to do that and kind of like the fallout of that decision.
Yeah. Now the book, you said that you always wanted to write a book about your childhood or something that brought up things with your childhood. Can you talk a little bit about that? Can you talk a little bit about the parallels with your childhood growing up in Florida and with this?
Yeah. So where to start? I grew up with, let's say, 2 younger brothers, a mother that didn't have a job and was living off $100 a month. And so we grew up in extreme poverty in Florida. And I wanted to kind of give voice to that time in my life, but update it to 2009. I think there were a lot of similarities. But it's interesting because the first chapter of this book takes place at a biker party. And a lot of those elements really came from a real biker party that I attended when I was a kid, and it struck me as I was writing horror stories when I was a kid. I
Oh,
loved
that's
writing.
just an ask. You were writing right
Yeah.
away.
Oh yeah, I was I was creating these little books when I was 5. My mom still has them. And I would draw them and do all these things. I have these stories. There was one about Tom the Alley Cat. There was one about a this giant robot named Zork that went around saving people. You know, I was just really into storytelling. I mean, that came from my grandmother and my mother, and we can talk about that later on, but they really are the reason I tell stories at all. We were a big storytelling family. But anyways, in terms of my childhood, one day 2 of my friends were sons of this one biker family, and I went over when I'd been to biker parties before, and it was there was a lot of fun, like a crazy mix of people, and just people living differently. It felt like, and I try to try to talk about this in the book, and it's just like people who felt they were tired tied to kind of like larger freedoms, at least for through a young man's eyes. Like it seems like they could do whatever they wanted. They could quit jobs, get new jobs. They would get on their bikes and they would go travel across the country. I had barely been out of the state before I was 16. There's this part where I say that Eddie hadn't been out to get a hadn't been out of state except to get a cheeseburger once with his mother. That is close to the truth with me. Like she drove us up there one time just to get out of state. I mean, we didn't travel very much. We didn't have much money. But getting back to the story about the bikers, like at that biker party, I met one guy who was a photographer for Biker Magazine. I met a guy who had false teeth he would take out, and his false tooth, one of them was filed to a point, like a vampire. And there was this, white supremacist that got very mouthy with a person of color and did get the hell kicked out of him there. Like all of these things were happening all around me. And the funny thing is, it wasn't necessarily a rare event, or it was just a lot of interesting people there at the same time, because in Florida there's just a bunch of interesting people. People flee a lot of other places to come down there and hide and escape. But that day, my friend's father came and we were sitting there talking, and he had asked me about what I was working on, what I was writing, because he knew I was a writer. And he said, one day you'll write about me. And I was like, meh. People say that all the time to writers. It's just like, oh, I got this story about my life and I want you to write it. I can't write it, but it's an incredible story. And a lot of people do have incredible stories, but people say it all the time, and I didn't really think much about it. And then, I left Florida when I was 18, 19 and ran away with my girlfriend then. It was a modern dancer, went to North Carolina. She ended up getting into school there. And then later on, she followed me to Iowa. And then after that, we went to New York. And during that time, I was writing a lot of different other things. I was writing poetry a lot more. I went to school for poetry, but I was always writing fiction. But I hadn't written that particular story until a little bit later. And I started thinking more about it, when I started thinking about where I came from and the stuff that I wanted to write about and the characters that I want to portray and the problems that I wanted to portray, like economic problems, social realities, cultural divisions, things like this, that really was harping on my imagination. And I realized like this was a key to who I became to some degree. And like there's just these rich characters, and Florida as a state is really kind of like wealthy in atmosphere, and hey, just dug into it and worked on it for about 2 decades.
Wow.
Yeah. I've been working on this one for a while. I've written other novels that I'm going back to, but honestly, what happened was I went to school for poetry, came out, I moved to New York. I started Brooklyn Arts Press as part of the kind of like DIY culture in Brooklyn, with a lot of my friends who were starting up their own companies then too, in my like late 20s, early 30s, and started publishing a lot of other people and just started publishing poetry. But I was always still writing fiction. And then I was working on this book, and we brought this book out to different editors, somebody I was working with before, and it just wasn't going anywhere. And I got some really poor feedback from some of the editors, but it was misplaced. I don't know. I had an editor that basically told me that he used to vacation down in Florida, and these weren't the kind of people that he ran into. And so that was frustrating. And that just made me dig in more and be like, okay, wait, I need to get this out in the world. This is the book that I want to start any kind of fiction career with. And so even though I was writing the other novels, which were like 4 or 5 of them now, I didn't want to put any of those out before I put this out. And so now I'm going back to some of those other ones and working on some other projects as well and seeing what I want to work on next. But I knew that I wanted to write about these people, but also in a specific time and place in 2009 when things were really like the vice grip had come down. There were a crazy amount of foreclosures. I tell the story of the house next to my grandmother's house was purchased for $20,000, and it had been constructed in the 50s, and this whole neighborhood was on a fire sale, basically. Like the Space Coast was so underwater, and a lot of
Yeah, can you Sorry to
Go
interrupt
ahead.
you. Can you just
No, good.
say for people who don't know what, like, you just define the Space Coast for anyone who
Oh,
isn't familiar
sure.
with
So
Florida?
the Space Coast is like Melbourne, Cape Canaveral, Cocoa Beach. It's where they used to launch the shuttles. It's where SpaceX is now. It's
Mm,
NASA. Um, my family and it's my family's worked for NASA in one way, shape, or form. A lot of family members, like both of my grandparents, one worked for Martin Marietta or the defense or aerospace industry, which is right there with all these different companies. Harris, a lot of my family worked for Harris,
mm,
building satellites and stuff like this. But then there's a large portion of my family, like my father, who laid bricks, did roofing and labor jobs most of life. And you can kind of see in the Space Coast, like the up and downs of the economy, and the crashes are big, right? If there were government contracts were lost or something like that, or if people fled, then in the town lost money. Like basically, Brevard County relies on tourism and the aerospace industry, and
mm.
if either of those falter at any point, you see a huge drop in revenue, and you just see people leaving. You see people impoverished. You see people being laid off their jobs, and so you get these huge fluctuations. It's a bizarre place to be at times.
It's also weird to me because it's like I'm listening to you talk about this, and I remember some of that time, like a little bit. I was younger, but but it's so I'm making as I'm listening to you talk about this now, I'm thinking about what's currently happening and how just the fluctuations and what's going to potentially happen again for all these places. I don't know. It's just interesting.
Yeah, we'll
It's
see what happens in the next 5 or 6 months here because of the tariffs and how that's going to be affecting the economy once it actually, because it hit the market and then came back up. But once it hits the economy, which is different, who knows what's going to happen, quite honestly. So I am a little fearful of that. And also, there's a good amount of stuff that is happening in politics now that we're discussing in terms of like everything from like masculinity and what that means to just the wide gap between people's understanding of the truth, people where they get their news from, what they understand to be real, and economically where people are between like the billionaires and what the middle class may actually look like and the working poor. And some of those attributes had origins, if not origins, had part of the timeline into that when, you know, during Obama's presidency, pre-Trump, when you see a lot of these things kind of like begin to manifest a lot of these issues. So I wanted to talk into some of those spaces too of what it looked like a little bit before, and which was interesting. Not be overtly political, but really just a lot of these things were there to talk about before.
yeah, and I don't think, and I don't, I never got that sense. Certainly, you could see now with books coming out or enough of something that leans into that, and that's not this at all. I mean,
Mm,
to me, it's really a character piece.
yeah.
It's also interesting, like I'm interested to see how the book is marketed in a way because I don't look at this as a straight out thriller. To
No.
me, it reminds me of like Winslow. It reminds me of these writers that it's much more of a crafted piece that are really about these characters in certain situations. And certainly, as the book goes, it accelerates because of the situation that's happening. And that I can go back to, say, Sons of Anarchy, if you're looking for a visual reference, or Breaking Bad, where the situations where this track is being laid, that okay, something's coming and it's not going to be good. And so, but that's what keeps driving you. But it's not like a quote unquote, what I term as a thriller, as there's a serial killer in the woods and how are they going to get out of the shack?
Yeah,
Um,
this is an interesting. I mean, this was one of the things of figuring out how to publicize and market this stuff, because honestly, it's a slow burn literary crime novel.
yes, yes,
Whatever that could mean, right? Maybe that's Mario Puzo, maybe that's Dennis Johnson, or even Cormac
yeah,
McCarthy to some degree. And if you're thinking about like crime and the crimes of the heart and the crimes against people, like maybe it's even. I mean, I certainly hope this could be the case of something like Toni Morrison, where you have character-driven work, a strong sense of place, and trying to bring a real humanity to the characters. That's the goal. But for all of this structure and setup and everything else, like I don't plot books. I really believe that plot comes out of character intuition and motivations, right? And whatever sense of
Mm.
urgency the language, propulsive urgency the language is kind of setting up. So for me, I just like to go straight into the characters and listen to them, see what antagonisms are around them, listen to that, draw in their sense of place, because I really do always think of place as a character
Mm.
working upon these people, and see where it goes. Just play through it, and they'll let you know what they're pissed about, what they're excited about, what their failures are, who they love. They'll let you know all of that fairly quickly. And for me, everything else grew out of character motivations, you know? And to say that there's this thing when I feel like sometimes when I'm writing action and action sequences, when it's that kind of propulsiveness that I need, and that's the more like thriller part of it, it's fun to do that, where the sentences become, where paragraphs are like one or two sentences and you're just
Right.
flying through, right? And you're and that kind of propulsiveness is there. But I like to take breaks for more kind of philosophical meanderings of the characters. I like to kind of have a deep interiority. And the reason I wanted a deep interiority for these particular characters is because, unconsciously or not, I think people think that poor people are dumb. I wanted to show that they're in fact not, and that we have the same motivations at times, and we feel similarly, if not the same, about things that hurt us, and things that change us and move us, and that people are thinking deeply about big subjects. One of the things about that I loved growing up in Florida, even though I was dirt poor, we would sneak out at night. Me and my friends, we would go and have a campfire. Somebody would bring a 12 pack or whatever, a case of beer or something, and we'd sit there and we would have these deep philosophical, um, 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 uh, I don't know, queries that we would pitch to one another and try to figure out, like,
Mm.
what the hell, where's our place in the world? What are we doing here? Why do things suck? How do we get out of this? What's the meaning of this? We'd have religious conversations. We'd go back and forth. We'd have, yeah, these theological conversations. We'd also have like these deep philosophical, and that was part of life. That wasn't something that's, I don't know, that's just part of the upper class and the middle classes. This is something that we do.
Yeah.
And I wanted to show that kind of deep interiority and the sense of spirit about these people. And yeah, yeah, it all kind of
You know,
mixes
it's
together there.
It does, and it's interesting to me because one of the things, and it's funny that you brought that up because one of my questions for you was, these characters are really intelligent, and I think the perception going into it when you hear, you read a back or you read a pitch line or what it's described as, is that it is going to be more kind of base. But these
Yeah,
characters, Eddie and Cue Ball, for our listeners and our viewers, are the kind of the central characters who we come into, the two friends. But
yeah,
a lot of it's really so much of it's Eddie's story, but
yeah.
Eddie and this girl that he meets up with, who becomes his girlfriend, Jin, they
Hmm.
have these incredible conversations. They're incredibly thoughtful. They're well read. They're very witty. Um, Cue Ball, his friend, has this appreciation for art. And then there's like arguably my favorite character in the book is Del Rey, who
Yeah,
is
people love Del Rey.
Del Rey is such an amazing character, and he is friends with Cue Ball's father and gets pulled into all this. But he is, balls to the wall, a philosopher, and he is
Yeah.
so interesting. And it's this really neat dichotomy of, like you said, these people who are they're incredibly intelligent, they're incredibly thoughtful, and they're searching for a way out, and faced with incredible odds and with a tinge of incredible violence around all of
Oh
this.
yeah, yeah. So their short story writer, his name is James Allen McPherson. He taught at Iowa Writers Workshop. I did not ever take a class with him, but my friends did. And one of the things that I learned through them was that he had mentioned was this use of the magisterial voice. And the magisterial voice is basically, and this might be a little bit difficult to explain, well, I'll try it, that
Mm.
we feel things similarly as humans, and that we may not have the words to express everything, but there's feeling is there, and the need to express is there, and the concepts and the ideas are there in some form. And so as a writer, what you can do is give those thoughts and feelings voice instead of just having it kind of trapped inside of them in this ineffable way. You can give them an eloquence, right, that they may not have in real life, right, but at the
Mm,
same time that they do have in real life.
yeah.
That those feelings and thoughts and everything that is inside, just giving voice to that and allowing yourself to give voice to that. I'm not writing, even though at times it may seem like it, I don't think of myself as a kind of like American realist writer, in the kind of literary writing sense. I think of myself as a writer who's trying to capture the reality of a situation. And so whatever I need to do to get there and to get those ideas on paper, and sometimes I'll do it. And that sometimes means um, giving people the words to say what they want to say. And sometimes taking those words away and having them not know what to say, which is part of it. But I want to hear what they're thinking. I want to hear what they have to say, and I like that kind of banter and wittiness and communication between them. I want a kind of full communication. Um, yeah, so I allowed for it. And there's so many different writers I can sit here and quote that do the same thing, but we don't necessarily talk about it in that way. And you can call some of those writers American realist writers, but it's not really realism in the same way. But
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I just want to be able to have them say what they feel. And so I allowed for it. And I think it worked.
No, it absolutely works. How much of you do you think is an Eddie?
Oh, that's rough. I don't know. This is one of those things that I go back to because when I started it, like you start with, or I started it with Eddie's viewpoint. A lot of these characters over time have been pushed together. There's like several characters you blend together because you realize they're saying the same things or they feeling, and so they really are kind of the same character. So why not just put all of these things into the one character? In terms of Eddie, I think I'm closer to Eddie than everyone else. But I also realize that like I am in certain ways a lot of the characters, if not all the
Mm,
characters. Like there's something about me when I sit there and I think about how I would react to any given situation. I have to put myself in their shoes. I walk around talking to myself for days, weeks. I do a lot of research. I call people, I write them. I try to figure out like what would this person do in this situation?
mm,
What's this like here and there? And try to live with them. So in some sense, I try to exhibit um the kind of like humanity that I want to portray. I try to like dig into the characters in order to give people somebody to really respond to. And so I'm in all of them to some degree. I don't think you
sure.
could be a writer and not be. But Eddie is closest to me, I think, because his point of view is the most prevalent in the book. I would say. Although I skip around to a lot of different points of view because I wanted to try to give some dimensionality um, beyond just the one POV.
Yeah, no, and I think it works. It's interesting because you do shift into so many other people at times. Um, I did find myself as we got deeper in this mess, and I'm not giving anything away, but
Yeah,
figuring like, oh my God, what's going to happen? Where is this going to go? Um, which is, fantastic. Um,
yeah. I had friends halfway through the book that would write me and be like, "You better not fucking kill this
I
person
thought
off."
this. I know. I was thinking the same thing a few times. I was literally like, because I was like, if this goes where it could go, and I will just say, I felt it was authentic, and I felt it landed where it needed to land, if that makes sense. And it felt true. So that I really 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 appreciated.
Thank
Um,
you.
it's interesting too because I think there's a lot of conversation in this about getting out or getting away. And and I'm just curious with you too, because you said earlier you got out. What was that moment for you, or in terms of getting out of Florida, and when did you know, like, I have to, there's something bigger for me
Oh
out there. I've got
man,
to see it.
this is I'm a pretty much open book. This is kind of a personal one, honestly, but I think it's
And
good
you
to
don't have to
talk
talk if
about.
you don't want to talk about it. It's fine.
No, I like that. I know people don't like to get very personal with these things, and maybe after many more interviews, I'll stop. But I think there's something interesting about this situation where I remember. So my father was living in Port St. John, which was 30 miles north. And he had divorced
Mm,
my mother when I was 11, and I had a 10-year-old brother, younger brother, and then I had a almost 1-year-old uh, brother, and we were all living with my mother. And then eventually, my youngest brother went to live with my father, and then my second youngest brother, Jason, who became the firefighter, went to go live with him, and I stayed with him. But I remember when I was leaving, everybody was living with my dad except me, and so many things had happened that I just couldn't deal with it anymore. Like
mm,
there were some kids that got shot. There were a couple that committed suicide. I was walking across to the Winn Dixie across the backyard, which cut through the the new city hall. And I was talking to this one skateboarder kid, and like 2 days later, a friend of his pointed a shotgun at his head as a joke, and then shot his head off. And
mm,
I there were a lot of people that were like ODing around me. It just felt like there was nothing for me there anymore. It was it felt extremely dangerous. I didn't feel like I had a track toward the kind of life that I might envision. I didn't expect to go to school at all. Uh, uh, I when I left and moved to North Carolina in a car with my girlfriend and her mother, and we stayed in a weekly rental place for a couple months while we got jobs and took the bus. But I didn't expect to go to UNCG in Greensboro, North Carolina. Was the only school that I
hmm
applied to. And I applied there because it had Fred Chappell and Jim Clark and Stuart Sheldon, a lot of really great writers there. And I got in because I lived there. Um, I didn't expect any of that stuff. I didn't expect to leave Florida, quite honestly, for a while. I just knew I wanted to be a writer. And so when I was leaving, my dad had called me and wanted to come talk to me and ask me why. So my dad was a jail guard for most of his life, prison guard for like, well,
mm,
16, 17 years, and then he became a probation officer. And he's a good man, pretty strict guy, pretty straightforward, good sense of humor. But he came down to talk to me to figure out like why I was just like abandoning ship, basically. What was I doing? And I remember when I would go visit my father, I would talk about I had a it's not a persona exactly, but I wouldn't cuss in front of him.
mm.
And he was a religious guy, and I kind of held my shit together. Meanwhile, back in Palm Bay, I was running wild. I had like stolen my mom's car and wrecked it. I was fuck, so many. I was just throwing parties. It was nuts. I was living the life of just I don't know, fast life. I was living the fast life for a while. And then I decided to open up to him that day as who I was, which was weird, and just went into this whole spiel about people are fucking dying and everybody's like everything sucks and there's no money, and I've been working at like various McDonald's. I worked at a Crystal Burger next to my mother was the clerk, and I she was taking the money, she was the cashier, and I was like making fries, and I was just like, and the guy in back who had like delivered bread had just killed his family the week before. This is true story, this is Florida stuff. And I was just like, what the fuck is happening in this place? I don't How am I going to get out of here? Like, how am I
Mm,
going to do anything that I want to do? I didn't even know what I wanted to do. I couldn't imagine like going to Europe or any place like that. I couldn't imagine doing a lot of things, but I knew that I didn't want to be there anymore. And I kind of saw my future laying brick, laying block. And I saw my future as an alcoholic, which unfortunately at the time my brother Jason was, and he was 16, 17,
mm.
and they were trying to pull him out of that. And and I was borderline alcoholic, and I was just like, I got to do something. So I just laid it all bare to my father. And again, I was cussing like a sailor. And at the end of it, I was like, does that make sense? And he said, I can't hear anything you're saying because you're cussing so much. And I was like, fuck. I was like, I don't know how to say this. I don't know how else to say this. Jesus Christ, I need to
Right.
do something with my life. Like something. I know there's more to this. Like I see it on, and the funny thing is, like I go back down afterwards. I'd go back down to Florida and hang out, and I'd find two of my cousins sitting on my grandmother's couch. My grandmother's the matriarch of the family, just wonderful human being. Once she quit work making silicone wafers at Harris, she literally stayed in her house without leaving for like 20 years. She
Wow.
left like 4 times. She stayed in her house and she raised everybody's kids. And I would go back there, and my cousins would be watching Jerry Springer, and they were like 9, and they'd have all of these really adult ideas on how the world worked, and I would sit there and listen to their adult ideas coming out of the mouths of these kids, and you grow up so fast there. Like you have to be ready to deal with a lot of horrible stuff really quickly and make executive decisions as a 9-year-old, or at least, And so I would listen to them, and some of what they would say would go into the book or go into another story or go into poems or whatever it was. Um, and it was just a fast life. It's just a fast, hard life. And at the same time, like it was so dynamic and wonderful and loving and caring and community filled and like present. Like I never feel more present, like actually in the moment than when I'm in Florida. Um, and it feels like everything's at stake, but also just kind of loose in a way. It's so strange. I don't know how to describe
Well, you have
this
a
kind of
great,
feelings.
I marked this description that Eddie talks about this group of people that he's within, all of their friends. And he says, he tried articulating the reasons he admired this rambunctious crowd while detailing their shortcomings. It wasn't just that some smoked weed in public or slugged Jack straight from the bottle or recounted tales that should have ended in dismemberment or death. It was how they'd come to work chaos naturally, even fruitfully into their lives, accepting what they could not change and bettering what they could. And I love
Yeah,
that.
yeah. I think that's right. I think that's right. I think, but it's also kind of what they want you to see in a way, right? I mean, underneath all of that is a lot of pain and a lot of that, like, and I also talk in that same section about like how it kept them from better jobs, how a lot of this stuff kind of kept them from like better relationships. It's a frustrating, it's so much of life is proximity,
Mm,
right out the gate, you
yeah.
know, um, wealth, access, which all boils down to options. This is something I like to harp
Yeah.
on. Like it's not money is money, but what money actually buys is options. And it's really just about the kind of options you have in the world that dictates who you are and who you become. Um, and you can take your understanding of that and become a better person, or you could just fulfill all those options for yourself. You can be very selfish with a lot of these things. But it's just interesting that proximity to a place, to certain people, um, it brings about advantages and disadvantages.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I want to be conscious of your time. Uh,
Yeah, hit me up, man.
these are just little things that I have to say that I appreciated so much. The first
Let's
I
do it.
didn't appreciate so much because
I appreciate
I
that.
I think you scarred I think you scarred me for a moment, which was hentai.
Okay.
Okay, so I
There's
had
some
no
words to look
idea.
up.
Yes, yes. One of the characters mentions like watching or joking with another character about watching hentai, and so I was like, I've never heard of this. What is this? And I
Oh, good
opened
for
up
you.
this world for me that I was like, wow. So I'm gonna let
Go
our
forth.
listeners and our viewers go forth and discover hentai themselves, the way that I did, or in the context of this book. Um,
It'll change your Google algorithm for sure.
oh my God, completely. That's all I need
Or
now.
any, yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I also love that at one point you referenced the drink, a suicide,
Oh
and this
yeah.
completely brought me back. Because I've mentioned this before to people, they had no idea what I was talking about. It took me back to summer camp, like completely. And for those who don't know, suicide is basically it's a combination of all these different sodas put together, like Coke and Sprite.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I love to get a suicide. So when I saw one of the characters, talking about a suicide, I was like, oh my God, I love this.
Try to go have
Um,
one now. It'll wreck your stomach. It will
yeah,
absolutely. It's the
yeah.
most disgusting thing. My first alcohol experience was actually somebody had like 9 different things in a cabinet when we just drank them all together, and it was the worst drinking experience of my life to this day still.
Yeah, you remember it, right?
Yeah. Well, with the
Um,
big gulps though, it's so sweet and nasty. It's so sweet and nasty. Ugh.
yeah. Well, and it's funny when you're young, you don't think about it, and as an adult, you taste something now, and you're like, "How did I?" I mean, I've had that even with Twinkies or any of those Hostess cupcakes. I'll try one now and be like, "This is just chemicals," and like where when I was
Yeah.
young, it was the best.
What did you
Um,
think about Gumby? This is something I've always wanted to do.
okay,
I'm going to start asking reviewers questions. What did
sure.
you think about Gumby
Um,
or Del Rey? Tell me a little bit about Del Rey.
No, no, no. Del Rey, I love so much. I found like Del Rey to me, like I said, he was one of my favorite characters just because I loved his philosophical nature, but uh, he was so no bullshit. He to me was like the Obi-Wan Kenobi of this book.
Yeah.
He to me was the sensei, and that's why I just loved him. I loved him. I loved him so much. And in some weird way, he's one of the few people that honestly understand it and understand what a moral compass is and where it's falling.
Yeah.
He's never wavered. He never wavers off that.
That's
And
a really interesting thing because one of the things that was interesting in going into these characters is figuring out what that code was that they live
yeah,
by, and some have different codes. But the Brotherhood code is what they want to bring kind of back together. But I
sure.
like this idea of when you're building community that there has to be kind of codes involved, right? That there has to be what are the moral imperatives of this? What can you break and get away with? What can't you? You know, when I think about books like The Godfather or something like that,
Mm.
certain things can be certain moral obligations can be broken and nobody says a thing. But there are certain codes that, if broken, you're going to be dead. That's it. Like there's these very specific things that make the community that follows along whatever codes you devise for that community. And I like that. There's something interesting about having that set outside of the kind of like moral reality of the larger umbrella culture, and then have this like smaller moral reality that dictates uh how people operate in those places.
How they operate and also where they fit in the caste system of that particular thing.
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah, sure. That's
And
interesting.
to make it clear that this is a caste system, where you fit in that, how you can possibly move up in that, and what your limitations are within that particular role, or how you're demoted. We see it in the book,
Yeah.
people being
Yeah, yeah.
demoted from a position or brought up in a position, and the feelings of belonging and worth that clearly are tied into that as well, and feeling like you do belong to something, while at the same time they're you know delivering this and producing this illegal drug that so many of them are getting hooked on, which
Hmm.
how could you not? So there's a lot of things at play that are really fascinating. Um, I want to mention that the book is right now you're getting adapted, correct, for HBO Max or Max or whatever they're calling it now.
I think they're back to HBO Max. I think
Is it
that's
HBO?
the
Yes.
latest thing. Well, we're working on it. I can't really talk too much
Yeah.
about it. It was
No, I'm
optioned.
sure you can't.
Um, but we have people working on it, which is, exciting. And being out here in LA and just being able to like be part of it, and they have been super gracious and kind and like just wonderful. Everybody's been wonderful to work with, and 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 also like that might be part of what I do in the future too. Like I still want to write novels. I really do.
You'll become
Like
Dennis Lehane.
I mean, honestly, that's what I said. I was like, that's what you want to be. In terms, I almost mentioned him earlier on in the conversation, but
No, he's
like,
one of my favorites, and that's what this
oh, it's
reminds me of.
fantastic.
This is very Dennis. Like people who are fans of Dennis Lehane will feel right at home here. That's what it is to me, and I think he's one of the
Yeah,
best.
I think what it is you just get. He's another good place. He's another good person that like uh, uh, has a great sense of place, just a
Yeah,
wonderful sense of place, and you're just right there. And
place and character. I mean, he's got
yes, it's
incredibly drawn
character, place,
characters.
and he juggles all of these things, and I mean, it's wonderful. It's wonderful. I don't know where I'm headed, what direction, except to say that like I do want to like keep writing novels, and I hope that this book allows me to write or publish another one and another one after that. And so I'm just really, this whole experience has been very thrilling. It took a while to get here. If I could tell people one thing, it's like, just keep going at it because eventually something will happen. That's what it feels like. I was also a small press publisher, so I published a lot of books where, where like people have been trying to uh, push their work for a while, and then it comes to me, and as one editor, I just love it, and then I get to put it out into the world as well. And like,
Yeah.
I don't know. I think if you stay in this business long enough, you'll get your work out there. And so I'm just happy and very thankful and grateful to have this book coming out, and hopefully it'll lead to some other stuff.
Yeah, well, it is fantastic. Please go out and get it. It is so good. Buy independent if you can. That would be
Yes.
amazing. But absolutely get it, Joe. I'm really excited for you, and hopefully all the doors this is going to open. And I'm so excited to see what you're coming up with next in terms of like what your next focus is going to be. I can't wait to see what that is. So
Well, thanks for having me, Brett. This was wonderful. It's good
yeah.
to talk with you.